and Jamie Fly. Thank you very much. My apologies to start off that I'm going to have my backs to the people who are sitting behind me. This is one of the disadvantages of sitting in the round, but maybe I can turn around from time to time. Just please accept that I'm aware that you're there and I'm not ignoring you. The way this session is going to unfold, we are going to have a brief discussion here. We're going to have some introductory remarks from each of our panelists. Then we will also have a little poll. We're going to create a sound cloud. This question for the sound cloud will be shown on the screen, and you can use your GlobeSec app here in the room or at home if you're following this online to give your input to the question. The question, by the way, is name the person you most admire of any age or culture who successfully challenged tyranny. Now this it's showing up on the wall right over there. Okay, I've got to get used to this surround immersive experience with the technology. That's marvelous. Compliments to GlobeSec. Let's jump straight into it. We know what we're dealing with here. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, leader of the United Transitional Cabinet of Belarus. We have Lobsang Sangay, former president of the Central Tibetan Administration. And we also have Jamie Fly, who is the executive president and chief executive officer of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. Now, this is not a completely symmetrical group we have here. So we have Svetlana Tikhanovskaya in exile, having faced an election in Belarus, which many believe that you won, that you are the rightful leader of Belarus. This is assumed. This is only a couple of years ago, and we have a hot war right next to Belarus in Ukraine, and with Russia being the aggressor, and Russia having now, it's said, transferred tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus, which many fear may be used in Ukraine. This is something that's happening right now. With Tibet, it's a slightly different situation. You've led a government in exile for years. You continue to lobby for Tibet to be, I don't know, we will find out exactly what you're hoping to achieve. And Jamie Fly, who is trying to provide information to provide a mindset for those who are indeed fighting tyranny, and you will share with us your ideas on that. I'd like to start with you, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. Maybe just update us on where your struggle stands today and where you see it going.
So thank you everybody who came here to hear about Belarus and our updates. I have to say that Belarus now is facing two main problems. The first one is total tyranny in Belarus. Political pressure is continuing in our country, and the number of political prisoners is increasing every day. Every day, 10, 15 people are being detained in our country. Not only those who are supporting changes, but also those who are supporting the war. And the other issue is threat to independence of Belarus. We see the signs of creeping or hybrid occupation by Russia for our country, and we see illegitimate Lukashenko who piece by piece selling our Belarus to Kremlin. So the aim of the regime now is to split democratic forces, to de-organize us. And our task as democratic forces, first to stay united, to engage all Belarusian people inside the country, outside country in the movement, and to continue our fight for democratic changes. So we creating structures to counter propaganda. We have United Transitional Cabinet. It's a unity of political forces of Belarus. We created Coordination Council that consists of NGOs, organizations, just to stay united to form public opinion. Also, we actively engage free media to shape people's mindset, to show the truth about situation in Belarus, to show situation in Ukraine. And also we are working with the international community, with international organizations. We want to institutionalize our relationship with countries, with organizations, to show them that it's important to work, vitally important, to work not with regime, with those who commit tyranny inside the country, but with those who share your values, who fight for democratization of Belarus. And of course, we face a lot of challenges in Belarus, a lot of challenges on international arena, but we are really together. We have a lot of friends around, so I believe in our victory one day.
Sangai, where do things stand now with your struggle for Tibet?
Well, I saw the poll and the name of Nelson Mandela as someone who succeeded fighting against the tyranny. I hope the next in line will be Dalai Lama, along with you. As far as Tibetans are concerned, if you read Freedom House Index, Tibet is listed at the bottom along with Syria as one of the least free regions in the whole world. That speaks for itself, and the situation in Tibet has gone from bad to worse since Xi Jinping became president. 157 Tibetans have committed self-immolation, burned themselves, and of which 133 have died. So the protest inside, resentment inside is continuing. Now, as far as my role as the president or prime minister of Tibetan government exiled for 10 years, the difference with Madam is that she gets to meet with all the presidents and prime ministers of Europe, America, and Canada. As far as I'm concerned, I was never accorded that kind of protocol. For 10 years, I could not even enter the State Department or the White House. So speaking of America, it still is the biggest, loudest supporter of Tibet. Of course, I could meet with leaders in the Congress. Speaker Nancy Pelosi was a good friend, Marco Rubio and the senators and others. It took me 10 years to enter the State Department and the White House. How? Because we are talking about resilience and persistence here. I lobbied. I used to go to Washington, D.C. 2 or 3 times a year. In 10 years, I went there 30, 40 times, didn't get to enter the State Department White House. Finally, we passed a law, Tibetan Policy and Support Act. Now it's law in America to support Tibet. And finally, I managed to enter the State Department, the White House.
When you
so
say
if you
we,
persist,
you mean the United States? Or?
United States, okay. Yes. Now, as far as Europe is concerned, yes, has been a bit wishy-washy, because I was, as the Prime Minister from 2011 to 2020. From 2011 to 17, everybody wanted to engage with China, make money with China, do business with China. So Tibet was seen as a nuisance, Now, climate has changed a bit, even in Europe. There's realization that China is a threat as far as freedom, human rights, democracy is concerned. But still there's a divided Europe. I have had some very disappointing experience with few foreign ministers of European countries, very rich. They didn't need Chinese money. Nevertheless, they reduced the protocol, even of visit of Dalai Lama to, let's say, Norway. Later, we found out that he was an advisor to Chinese government's state council in some capacity. So, unfortunately, the fight against tyranny continues. There are voices around the world. There are activists and freedom fighters around the world. They need all the help from government, civil society, and this kind of forum helps, magnify our voices. So thank you to Globsec and my friend Martin and others for organizing this.
Thank you. Jamie Fly, you are on the cutting edge of trying to change the regimes, let's say. Would you say, is regime change one of your missions?
We don't focus on a mission of regime change. I mean, our mission is providing truthful reporting to audiences where they're being denied facts, usually by state-sponsored propaganda, by a closing or closed political system like the one that Svetlana described in Belarus, where it's not just being a journalist or being a protester or political activist that can get you jail time right now in Belarus. Actually consuming truthful reporting can get you a prison sentence. And we've had reports that some of our audience in Belarus have actually served jail time for visiting the act of visiting a website in 2022, 2023. That is the sort of authoritarian control we're talking about. And unfortunately, it's not just Belarus. We're seeing these trends across Eurasia, where RFERL operates in 23 countries and 27 languages, you see the landscape shifting, you see the situation getting worse in country after country, and when they see these tactics work that are deployed by regimes like the Lukashenko regime, they're tempted to try to similar methods to rein in their population and resist the efforts of citizens to take power into their own hands.
My question, I wasn't trying to be provocative in this sense, because it is kind of a loaded term, regime change. I respect that. What I was more trying to get at, what is the purpose of your organization, of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty? You provide this information, accurate information, as opposed to disinformation about what's going on in those societies, and you try to make it accessible to the people there, despite the obstacles that are put in their way. And but to what end? What is the ultimate purpose, the strategic purpose of that?
Well, I think we believe that healthy, independent media is essential to democracy. I think in the West, in the EU, in the US, at this point, there's been a decline in trust in media. I think many of our citizens take for granted the role that the media plays in holding politicians accountable, being a check on government power. And so, at least in the US, there's a strong view. This is why we've been funded for more than 70 years now and have supported the US Congress across the political spectrum in the US, that our work is vital if we're serious about helping to foster democracy in countries that either don't have it or are struggling democracies that are on that transition path. The sad thing I just note as well about the landscape we're looking at is we as a company have actually returned to 3 EU member states in the last 5 years. So this is, again, not just a situation we're facing in places like Belarus, Russia, or Central Asia. This is a problem that's starting to hit home as well in Western societies, and I think we need to realize that and take steps to reinforce independent media.
Just so everyone knows, I do work as a journalist myself. I'm a broadcaster. I work for Germany's foreign broadcasting service, Deutsche Welle, which broadcasts in 32 languages, also to some of the countries you were just describing, also with a mandate to provide accurate information about what's going on in the world, and this contributes to democracy. And I would just make one more point before I bring you in, that yesterday we had a very interesting session where the focus was on disinformation and democracy, and the relationship between information, a free press, and democracy is absolutely vital. I can only subscribe to that and feel I need to underline that as a journalist. Please.
Is talking about disinformation. For example, Chinese government television, CGTN, right? The English version has 100 and I think around 50 million subscribers around the world. Now, BBC, CNN, and Al Jazeera, English language combined, has less than 100 million. So CGTN Chinese English language, I'm not talking about in Chinese language, okay, there are 1.4 billion people. These are not the people. It's the English-speaking people around the world subscribe to CGTN, around 150 million subscribers. So it's far more than CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera and other English language, combined. So this is what we are confronting with. And if you look at Xinhua News Agency or People's Daily, the French version or the German version, I'm pretty sure, they have more subscribers than DW and other, French. So that's why, any Radio Liberty is very important to, engage, so we can give not just, challenge disinformation, but the truth about Tibet. So as far as we are overwhelmed with that kind of information.
Information. A free press. These are considered essential instruments for democracy, as we've just pointed out. But what effect is our efforts to provide that sort of information, the sort of accurate reporting within China, within Belarus? What impact is that having? Do you feel that's having an impact? Is it helping? Svetlana, take on this.
In Belarus, all the alternative or free media have been ruined, and all the media have been recognized by illegitimate regime as extremists or terrorists. So most of our free media had to relocate to other countries and to broadcast from exile. and Radio Free Europe was in Belarus as well. Your office was ruined. Some of journalists are in prisons. But of course, the meaning of free media cannot be underestimated, of course, because through non-conventional media, we can spread messages inside Belarus. Because people in our country, if they watch Radio Free Europe or other Belarusian free media, they can be detained for this. And we are using maybe as I said, non-conventional methods: YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Telegram, all the means, that people can use freely inside the country. We don't have access to television, we don't have access to newspapers in our country, but it's so important, to support free media in such situation when we don't have, self-supplies. We need assistance, technical assistance from other countries, from powerful countries. Inside Belarus, for those people who can't use internet, like elderly people or people in villages, we have network of volunteers that spread self-made newspapers. It's like old method of spread information, but we have to use this. And of course, what I'm advocating for is that media powerful companies have Belarusian departments in the entities. Like Radio Free Europe has Belarusian department, Deutsche Welle opened one, BBC. I don't know, other media network also have to pay attention to this issue. We simultaneously we are working with Google to counter propaganda together, to highlight Belarusian question, to translate programs in Belarusian language, not to broadcast in Russian, because one of our priorities is to strengthen national identity, to strengthen Belarusian language, and this is where free media, international media can be useful as well.
I think we can all agree that access to free and accurate information is essential for democracy and for people to be informed about what's going on in the world and how to hold their governments also to account for independent reporting on that. That's just one aspect, though. Beyond that, what are governments doing? I mean, your organization is funded by the U.S. government, I believe, Jamie Fly. What do you expect from governments beyond media providing some sort of access to free and accurate information to help your causes, to actually affect change? Because, it's not going to be just through media. I'd like for you to also bring in the private sector, if you can, what they're doing. You mentioned Google supporting you in some way, but what can be done to actually affect change? And you're looking at this from very different perspectives. Sangai, your struggle has been going on for decades.
Yes.
And many
60 years old veteran, I think this is true, yeah.
And many look at Tibet and say, this is a lost cause. I remember when I moved to Berlin 30 years ago, there were Free Tibet stickers and flags all over the city in the kind of alternative cultures. These have kind of slowly faded away. You don't see them much anymore. There's not much focus on it. Belarus is getting a lot of attention right now, but people look at Lukashenko and look at his alliance with Putin and think, how can that be broken down? What can be done?
Now, I think as far as the question of the panel was about the mindset of the freedom fighters, right? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it's persistence and perseverance and passion. It has to come from within. If you're a freedom fighter, if you rely on someone else, they will come and go. It's like a roller coaster. I'm very happy that Madam gets to meet all the head of states, but time will come again. We'll say Belarus is now out of headlines, and let's downgrade that meeting. So as 60 years,
where do you draw that from? This passion and this persistence in your case?
Of course, my country, Tibet, is under occupation. 6 million Tibetans are suffering. As a human being and as a Tibetan, I have no option but to express my solidarity. My father was a freedom fighter, has just passed on his legacy to me, and I have to pass on my legacy to my daughter and all the younger generation, right? And challenges are huge, as you asked. what can governments do? For example, when it comes to media, Chinese government policy is very clear. 0-100 policy, meaning zero information from outside on Tibet and 100% information or propaganda to the outside world. That's why they have banned Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That's why the CGTN Facebook accounts has 150 million subscribers, whereas they have banned in China. Now, why can't the European countries ask for reciprocity? If you want to, have accounts in Facebook in the Western world, why don't you allow, Facebook to be accessible to Chinese people at Twitter and Instagram, right? It's reciprocity. You want to come in? Yes. You should allow us to come inside China as well. They are using Facebook, and Facebook is allowing them to be used for CGTN, but Facebook doesn't say anything about Chinese people having access inside. So these are the challenges where governments can do, civil society can do, and people can always get involved.
So, Jamie Fly, I want to bring you in because again, you represent to some degree the United States' efforts to provide free information, access to information outside. So, what is the government of the United States, when it looks at Belarus and it looks at the cause of Tibet, and what is the policy within the State Department, say, with trying to affect change there besides, say, supporting your organization? Is this a lost cause? Is Tibet a lost cause from the U.S. perspective? And what about Belarus?
So I'll just be clear that I cannot speak on behalf of the U.S. government because actually I don't work for the U.S. government since we are independent, even though every year the U.S. Congress does fund us. But our editorial independence is enshrined in U.S. law, and that's important, part of the equation too, because U.S. taxpayers, even though they fund us, are funding us because they support the type of work we do, not because they want to direct the type of coverage that we provide. And I think that goes, though, in the U.S. there's an understanding that this is a long-term effort. We have a 70-year history. For a number of the countries that we worked in where we don't work anymore, it was a decades-long struggle to provide news information despite authoritarian attempts to block our signals when we were mostly broadcasting and radio. Now the modern equivalent is blocking internet, censoring what websites you can watch. But throughout those decades, we had a committed audience, including in places like Slovakia, Czech Republic, where we're headquartered now in Prague. It was illegal for us to even operate or send a journalist to Prague 30 or 40 years ago. Now we have 700 staff working there after we were invited by Václav Havel because of his respect for our work. So you see that even after decades, things can change. People during those dark periods are still interested in seeking out the truth. And the stories that Svetlana mentioned of citizens trying to find sources of information, we are seeing those in country after country, including in places like Russia, where 3 years ago you could go to our websites without any problem. Now they're blocked. You have to use a virtual private network. VPN downloads are at record highs in Russia right now. Yeah. People are seeking out alternative means of getting information because they don't trust the propaganda that they're getting from their regime, especially when global events, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, affect people's lives. They want to know what is actually happening next door. They want to know what is truly going on the front lines. They want to know why their own personal economic situation is affected. And we see again and again, just like the Czechs and Slovaks who had to turn the dial to find the frequency that was not being jammed that particular night, Russians today, Belarusians and others are using tools, using technology to come to us, to come to other independent sources. And right now I'll just note that our Russian audience online is the highest ever, despite the fact that our websites have been blocked ever since the start of the full-scale invasion. You can see through those actions of the audience that people are interested in this factual reporting and they're hungry for it. And so I think that gets to your earlier question about impact.
We have about only 14 minutes left, I see there on the clock, and I do want to get some questions from the audience while we're here. I failed to mention, by the way, my apologies, that anyone who's following this online can also submit a question, and it will magically appear on this little tablet in front of me. And then when we get towards the end, we'll take a look at the completed Slido word cloud. But maybe we can get that up on the screen right now just to see where our word cloud has come. Can we put that on the screen to see?
Terry, can I make one point?
Sure.
Because you mentioned Tibet as a lost cause twice.
Yes. Yeah.
I must say, because we are in
It's an
Central
impression
Europe.
many people have.
That's true, yes. I've been to Central Europe, right? Slovakia, and Czech and other countries. In late 1980s, many of the people in Central Europe thought it was a lost cause. Soviet Union was so powerful. The Berlin Wall will never come down. We all mentioned, here Nelson Mandela, Václav Havel, all the names were mentioned. Even Nelson, if you read the, history of Nelson Mandela, he spent 27 years in prison, of which, 18 years in solitary confinement. Even news media, I'm not trying to blame you, but, wrote an obituary about Nelson Mandela. He's a lost cause, Václav Havel was a lost cause, right? So it's just a matter of time. And then we are Buddhists. We believe in reincarnation. Even if I die, I come back. You are never a lost cause. And then we believe in karma. Karma kicks in good. I just got a message from hell that Mao Zedong is in hell now. He's not going to be released for 10,000 years, So we believe in reincarnation, karma. So there's never a lost cause. You always have second shot.
Thank you very much. It's a very important point indeed. I want to open up the floor to questions. I see a couple of hands already, and I'm going to have to turn around to see the people behind me when there's questions. But I see two hands. I see this one went up very quickly, and then in the front row there. So we'll start with, I believe it's Peter.
Peter Wilding.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. I would like to ask Svetlana a question, if you don't mind, particularly with the news, right or wrong, that Lukashenko is a little bit ill today. Since the revolt in 2020, it is critical to understand, is it not, that if Belarus saw even even half of the revolt that we saw in 2020, that would change the course of the war in Ukraine and in fact change the geopolitics of Central and Eastern Europe. So Belarus is absolutely critical in the fulcrum point of history right now. So my question really is quite simple. Everybody in Belarus must know this. Surely foreign governments are assisting those who are in rebellion against Lukashenko. And I would like to know from the ground floor, and I'm sure everybody else would, why is Belarus still quiescent? Is it tyranny alone, or is it something else? Because if Belarus revolted, then the geopolitics of this continent would change automatically.
To understand Belarusians, people have to live under dictatorship for many, many years. Sometimes when I hear from politicians or diplomats why people don't uprise again, if again will be hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, you would change again, you will use this opportunity. But just imagine yourself on the place of every Belarusian at the moment. You live in constant fear. Every day you can be detained for no reasons. For donating 20 euros to Ukrainian army, for wearing wrong color of socks, for singing a Belarusian or Ukrainian song. So now people are under huge repression. But when this news about Lukashenko's illness appeared in media, it galvanized discussion of Belarusian people. Do we have plan? What's our strategy? When we'll have to go to the streets, And it's frightened Lukashenko, and he appeared for 15 minutes to show that, look, I'm here, stop these discussions. So I see the readiness of Belarusian people to use the moment of opportunity when it appears. And of course, I want to explain to our political allies how Belarus is strategically important. That don't leave Belarus for one day later. Now we are dealing with Ukraine, what we are fully support, because Ukrainians now are fighting not for their lands, they are fighting for all the democracies in the world. But don't overlook Belarus, because the war cannot be over until Belarus is free. Belarusian people are ready to fight. They are ready to to get rid of the regime, but we can't do this alone. We need assistance of the whole democratic world. And now when I return into lost cause, while people in any country who are fighting for democracy believe and fight, no one politician in the democratic world can say it's a lost cause, because for them it's excuse why we are not doing anything. Why we stop supporting, why we are stop
defeatist, yeah.
Absolutely, and it can take ages, but we don't have to lose hope. I will tell you now a rather personal story. I have a child with special needs, and I had to rehabilitate him for 10 years. At the beginning of this path, I didn't know what will be the outcome of rehabilitation. Will I be able to integrate my child, in the society? But I knew that every day I had to work with him, I have to study him, I have, to not knowing if there is a light in the end of tunnel. But this was my responsibility for my child. So fight for democracy in Belarus is my responsibility for my country. So I can't stop and say, oh, it's a lost cause,
Thank you. I see both of you sitting side by side.
Can I hand the microphone to my neighbour after I've asked a quick question?
Okay, yeah. Why don't we bundle those questions then?
Is that good?
And we'll
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Terry, for moderating such a great session. It's good to see old friends Jamie, Svetlana, Lobsang. Just so we don't have to wait for our reincarnation, but seriously, the global freedom agenda perhaps needs a big victory, a big push. It is an optimistic scenario out of a terrible situation, but if Russia definitively loses in Ukraine, there is a scenario in which the Putin regime collapses. Now, it may not lead to a better alternative, but there is at least the hope for that. Svetlana, to you, obviously directly affected by what happens in Moscow, and Lobsang, if the regime were to fall in Moscow, do you think that gives you guys hope in Tibet? Because this would have quite significant effect on global autocracy and potentially a knock-on effect in Beijing, which you could potentially benefit from. And Jamie, obviously, providing an overview. If you'd like to comment, please go ahead.
Thank you. That's already quite a bit. Maybe we'll take your question right now, too, and just bundle it.
Thank you. Salome Samadashvili, Member of Parliament from Georgia. First of all, I want to thank you, Svetlana, for the fight that you are putting up, because as the member of opposition in the country which is increasingly authoritarian, we know what does it mean to fight the regime and how difficult it is. And to be honest, of course, for us in Georgia, it's very important what happens in Belarus, because my country, unfortunately, is, kind of looking more and more like this government is trying to take us closer to Lukashenko model rather than the European model. And I'm sorry that the Prime Minister of Georgia used the GlobSec forum this morning to announce basically the change of policy and declared that NATO seems to be no longer the choice of his government or joining the NATO. I have a question to you about the Western policies towards Lukashenko, because when I was Georgia's ambassador in Brussels, I remember for a long time there was this discussion that we should try to keep, ties with Lukashenko. If we push him harder, if we introduce sanctions, then he will really turn towards Russia. It's very much the discussion that I hear now about my own government, that, if we push these people harder, maybe they will actually change their foreign policy orientation. Do you think that the Western intervention earlier in terms of putting pressure on Lukashenko could have saved space in Belarus for democratic change? Because, of course, now what's happening is extremely discouraging, because that's how authoritarians work. They just crush protest and think that we all get tired and we just cannot continue and give up. Do you think the West should have acted earlier? Thank you.
So we've collected a couple of ideas there. There's the question of what impact Russia losing in Ukraine might have on Belarus and perhaps also China and by extension Tibet. And we have the question of whether pressure earlier on Belarus might have affected change.
Look, I'm absolutely sure that Ukrainians, with the assistance of democratic world, will win this war. And of course, at this moment, Kremlin will be weakened, and hence Lukashenko will be weakened as well, and dictators hopefully in other countries. And our task is to be ready for that moment. That's why we are building structures, we are institutionalizing our relationship with the organizations, with governments, to have this period of transition smooth and fast. We will have to feel this moment of opportunity to mobilize people inside the country, to mobilize civil society, those who are in exile, but also to mobilize our political ally, for some actions. When Lukashenko got ill, and we discovered that democratic partners don't have clear strategy what to do in case Lukashenko disappears. We understand that it will be turbulence inside Belarus. There will be a competition maybe between some powers inside the country. The Russians would like to put somebody. What will be the response from international society? That's the question.
Go ahead.
If Ukrainians prevail, I think this is a fight or war of freedom versus dictator, right? So I think if Ukrainians win the war and manage to, regain all their territory, it will be a historical catalyst moment like the fall of Berlin Wall. The freedom prevails once again. The little guys prevail once again, right? So that will send a message to Asia, to China, saying, sending a clear message that beware if you are thinking of, invading or attacking Taiwan. Now, not waiting for reincarnation, just in this life, something unique is happening, because in that, a panel, it's mentioned, Iran is mentioned. How did the protests in Iran happen? A minority Kurdish woman, right, Asa Amini, right, she wore hijab the wrong way, they beat her up and died. That galvanized whole of Iranian women to come and support, led to the movement. Now in China, because of zero COVID policy, right, a Uyghur woman, Abdul Rahman, dies with her 4 children. That galvanized Han Chinese all over China to come and protest against COVID policy, zero COVID policy of the Chinese government. So, a minority sparking of nationwide protests in China and in Iran speaks for itself that not just reincarnation, in this life itself, things are happening.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we only have a minute left, and I want to give Jamie Fly then the last word on this, since I think we do need to leave the room promptly, unfortunately. And there's clearly so much more to say on this subject. We can learn so much from all of you. Jamie.
I would just say to Robin's hopeful and optimistic question about what things need to be done after Ukrainian victory, I think the danger is a new complacency, because the war, even if it's won, the war for democracy will not be won in places like Ukraine or Belarus, as we've seen in Moldova and Georgia overnight. Even when, in the case of Moldova, you have a government that wants to push in the right direction, there's still capacity issues, there's corruption, there's attacks on independent media and efforts by external authoritarians to undermine, and we're going to see the same thing, I think, even after a Ukrainian victory on the battlefield. And so the resolve from the US and the European democracies will still need to be there.
I'm told we can take an extra 2 or 3 minutes. So I want to get the word cloud up on the screen for just a second to take a look at it before we close. There we see Nelson Mandela making a comeback. Yasser Arafat was the most dominant name there for a while, and it still is at this point. But we see, Volodymyr Zelensky there, Winston Churchill, Václav Havel, but Nelson Mandela, Yasser Arafat, and many others standing up, of course, and some of you as well, both of you mentioned there, of course, Lobsang and Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. A final word from the two of you regarding what your message of inspiration would be to other freedom fighters around the world. Freedom's Fighters, as the title of this session is called. What your message would be to inspire them to continue over the long haul to achieve what we all agree could be very, very difficult.
I think Chinese leader Mao Zedong said, wherever there is repression, there will be resentment and there will be revolt, right? So we are human beings, social beings. We all are born free, and we would like to die as a free person. So the freedom struggle, freedom movement, and freedom fighters will dominate the world till the end of tyranny and dictators. That's the way it is. That's what karma is all about.
Svetlana Tikhanovskaya.
No, my message will be rather simple. Don't lose hope, and believe that your fight for liberty, for freedom, for democracy will prevail. We have to share our experience. We have to share tools and instruments how to fight with dictators. But again, fight for democracy is not a local one. We, Tibet and Belarusians, are fighting for global values, for values that we are all sharing. And it's a moral obligation of every powerful, small, big country, to support those who are still overcoming the challenges, who are still on this path. We can't do it alone. This fight is a global one.
Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, Jamie Fly, and Lobsang Sangay, thank you, all of you and everyone here in our room, for participating in this. I hope we can continue this discussion again at some point, and hope we've all learned something. I certainly have. Thank you all.
Thank you.